the first house that Joe and I worked on. We bought a house in Baldwin, Kansas that was built in 1910. And it was quite an experience for us.
It was quite an experience. A wonderful Queen Anne style house, but it had been neglected over the years, a lot of years. And great location. It was directly across from the university and been used for student housing for a lot of years. But you know, we're newly married. She's working full time. I'm working pretty much full time, going to school full time, and we had no money. So whatever we could buy, it had to be pretty cheap. And so, really kind of interesting that Mary's uncle had this house that he had bought for his kids going to school, and we were able to purchase it from him for a pretty good. He didn't require much of a down payment because we didn't have much, and then we purchased the house for $25,000, which was pretty cheap even then, but it was a lot of money for us.
Yeah, considering we had none. But since it had been used for housing before, it had an upstairs, main floor and then the second floor. And the stairway was partitioned off. So we thought, well, let's fix up the upstairs and start renting that out, get some income from that so that it'll offset our mortgage payment. Our mortgage payment was $300 a month. We rented out the upstairs for $200 a month. So it was pretty decent, mortgage for us, $100 a month out of our pocket. So
But it did need a lot of work. And I mean, none of the infrastructure was in very good shape. It had original knob and tube, galvanized pipes. The heating system consisted of a wall-mounted furnace right in the middle of the living room. And in the dead of winter, sometimes we'd find ourselves sleeping on the living room floor because that was the room with the heat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with blankets over the doorways. It was crazy.
But you do what you have to do when you're young and getting started out. But I will say that I'm really fortunate in my upbringing is that any project that we needed to do, I just always said, well, I'll learn how to do it. And I think that lack of fear, sometimes just the lack of any common sense, but that lack of fear helped us get through a lot of stuff because even if we didn't know something, there was always This Old House on TV, or there was a book somewhere in a library that you could go look something up. And so I was never afraid to tackle anything.
Yeah. There's so many things that we had to do. The first winter we were there was freezing cold. I mean, it was record cold, below zero for a couple of days, well below zero. And we were huddled around that wall furnace, just trying to, keep the frost from getting on our noses or something. But he decided that he probably ought to go put some insulation in. There was no insulation between the floor and the crawl space. And
that crawl space was breezy.
There
was some air blowing through there.
Right. So he went down there. I don't know how we afforded the insulation. You probably scrounged it up from somewhere.
I probably got it out of a dumpster somewhere because that's where I got most of the materials I got. Any piece of 2x4 I saw sticking out of a dumpster, I was stealing it because, man, I needed that pretty bad.
So anyway, as he was putting the insulation in underneath, he was getting colder, but I was upstairs inside and I was getting warmer. So it was great.
That's quite a project. And then as we went along, we just kept having to learn, more and more things about how to do this. And we became, much more interested in how old houses are put together. And one of the biggest projects we had was this house had been painted in 40 years at least. And the paint was sticking off in big flakes and there were big alligator skins and it looked really bad. But Mary had a wonderful idea one day.
Yeah, we're on the south side where it was really baked on, big chunks, that were not coming off. We were scraping and sanding and I'd say, don't you have a different tool we can use that'll get this? And nothing was working. And so I finally just got to thinking as I'm scraping on these boards, I thought, I bet the other side of this board is nice and clean. So I stepped back and I said, is there any reason we couldn't take these boards off and flip them over and put them back up? And he's like, maybe.
So I proceeded to remove a few boards, and sure enough, the backside of those boards was pristine redwood from 1910, and they were great looking pieces of lumber. So I borrowed a belt sander from my father, and I proceeded to sand a few boards, and they come out looking fantastic. So that was the saga of repainting the house. Over the course of 4 years, I took and numbered every single piece of siding, all the way up this 2.5 story house, took them all off, sanded the backside, and put them all back up so that I had pristine redwood siding all the way up to the peak of the gables. And interestingly, in a little sidebar on that story, is that there were a few boards that were just, we couldn't save them. And where do you find redwood siding like that in the middle of the Kansas? And right around the corner from our house was Hartley Lumber. It was lumberyard started in 1880, and sure enough, I took a piece of that siding over to the lumberyard, and the old guy behind the counter said, "You know, I might have some of that." And so he drugged me all the way to the back of the warehouse under a big pile of lumber and unearthed this stack of 20 boards, lovely redwood 1x6 siding. And he says, "You know, I'll bet this has been here longer than I've been here." And he was 70, so this could have been the original siding that they used to side my house. And so I was able to buy that stack of lumber. I don't know how I did it because I didn't have any money. I must have paid it in time slot, once so much a month, but I was able to have enough lumber to finish, residing the house.
Yeah, we were we learned how to be resourceful on a lot of things. The kitchen, kitchens can be very expensive to remodel. I know Joe built all the cabinets that were in there, and the kitchen sink that was originally there was two sides and a double sink that were really deep, and then attached to it as part of this whole unit was a drain board. So it was all porcelain sink and drain board, and we were able to reuse that. And it was the best sink I've ever had. I loved that thing.
Yeah, and the stove was the neighbor was throwing out an old stove that they had, and it was a gorgeous 1950s cast, porcelain stove with the gas cooktop, and they were just going to throw it away because it was old. And I said, "Oh no!" So I went down the street, got it with a couple of dollies, and I'm wheeling the stove up the street, pushing it by myself on these two dollies to get it to my house so that I could do a few of the gas jets and whatever. I figured out, got a book on it, how to source the little gas jets to fix it. And that stove was one of the best stoves we've ever had, made in the 1950s, but it fit the house perfectly.
Yeah. So I think Joe mentioned watching This Old House on PBS. There was another show, for those of you in our era, called The Frugal Gourmet, and it was on in the mornings before This Old House was on. These are all PBS shows from back in the 80s. And so The Frugal Gourmet, he was all about, making stuff out of, these gourmet meals out of just what you have on hand. And so Joe and I were laughing about, hey, we could have our own show called The Frugal Remodeler. And so we thought, this is kind of becoming a thing with us. This is it was the beginnings of our business, basically.
Yeah, and if I didn't know how to do something, there was always somebody who did. I was going to go hunt somebody down that had the knowledge, and then I could learn from them, get a book, watch a TV show. There wasn't internet then.
Yeah.
So all of these things led us to start being more and more interested in it. And as I'm going through school, getting my degree in history, I became interested in how all of this housing stock came about, and became much more interested in the older houses because I just love the way they were built. They have style, but there's a lot of issues that you deal with in an old house that you don't deal with in a modern house. So I'm having to learn all this stuff as we go. And so one day, at one of my part-time jobs, I'm working for a woodworker who was just around the corner from us, and I'm in the back room, and he's given me this project where I'm having to carve this mahogany grapevine hallway mirror for a client. And if I was cheap, he was much cheaper, because the tools he gave me to do this job with an old spoon, a butter knife that I had to keep sharpened on a little whetstone, and I'm carving this very intricate mahogany picture frame out of these really primitive tools.
I don't know why he turned you loose on that a project.
I
like
don't
that
know either because I didn't know anything. So into the shop walks this guy that lived in Baldwin and who happened to be a furniture builder also, and he sees me struggling with this piece, and he says, "Just hold up a minute." So he goes back to his own shop and gets an old secondhand set of carving tools that he had and brought it into me, and that was my first meeting with a really good friend of mine, Matt Kirby, who's an artist and a woodworker extraordinaire. And he's a guy that does all kinds of instruments and stuff like that. Yeah. And through Matt, since he knew everybody in Lawrence,
Douglas
and
County,
Douglas County, I started to do some work, and we worked on houses in Lawrence, and started to work on some of these older houses for the people that he knew. And so that's really what led us into the start of our business. Is I started to fall in love with this and restoring and working on these old houses. That was really got to be where our path forward was.
Yeah, and we just decided, we decided that we were in a small market and we needed to get in a bigger market, and we knew that Kansas City has, it's been around since the 1800s too. So we just decided that maybe we needed to move into town. We moved into Overland Park, and well. We sold that house. Remember, we bought it for $25,000. We sold it 5 years later for $60,000. And the guy that bought it from us decided to turn it into a bed and breakfast. He thought it was so awesome. And so they're not in business anymore. I just looked up on Google, and it's back to student housing again. But that was pretty cool, and it validated that if you take an old house that needs help and restore it, you have some value there, whether you want to flip it again or not. That term wasn't even around back then, but if you wanted to sell it, you could make some money. If you wanted to stay in it, you're staying in a home with some history that has been restored, and it's a beautiful thing. But anyway, moved up here to Overland Park and decided to start working on historical homes here in the Kansas City area, trying to figure out what we could call our business. It wasn't going to be Thompson Construction or Joe and Mary, blah, 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 whatever, contracting. We decided we needed to tell people what we do and who we are. So
as with the architectural school background, that was part of it. And the fact that that we appreciate the craftsmanship that goes into these older homes. The name Architectural Craftsman came about, and I think it embodies the spirit that we have about what we do.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for joining us today and letting us kind of reminisce a little bit about our first-time homeowner experience. It was quite a ride, and as you can tell, we've got great memories.
And we really want people out there and you guys that are watching to just not be afraid. An old house is always an adventure, and doing things in an old house is the fun part about it is learning. And if you fail, so what? You've learned something, try it again, get some more information, go after your dreams. And I think that's what gets us so excited about what we do is the fun part of renovating an old house. And if you like what you hear us talking about, like and subscribe. We appreciate your input. If you have any comments, we'll see you next time.